Alright, good morning, everybody out there in YouTube land. So here I am at a different part of the Riverside Park I usually hang out at. I'm a little closer to home base, and no, that's actually not my Santa Cruz. Mine is actually parked right next to it. You know, I took a funny picture as a joke. Because my specimen, has stuff that the one in front of me doesn't. Almost like one of those, I think my Santa Cruz lost a few things. Or did it? Anyhow, into the topic here. So, as you know, I'm still on the job hunt. I have a video interview at 11 o'clock. So, again, I didn't want to stay at home, mope around, stare in front of the computer all day. Even though I'm all but completely tethered to it. And just want to come out here and talk to you guys. So it's definitely really, really chaotic in today's world. Everywhere you see on the news, it's Trump this, Trump that, police immunity this, ice that, and it's just and it's student loan this, student loan that, unemployment. It's just chaos. That's what it boils down to. It's total, utter chaos. And like I said, some of my other videos, it's almost like, it's like Trump is a wannabe dictator. A dictator wannabe. His way or the highway. I mean, he's already at odds with Elon Musk, and they were supposed to be buddies. And now recently he's been at odds with Putin, and they were supposed to be buddies. And again, I have a hard time fucking believing half the shit I fucking see. I've always gone by the adage, I believe everything I see, in real life, and half of what I hear, and again, I'm not trying to sound all doom and gloom, because if you get all doom and gloom, then they win. Government and corporations win when people are divided, and they very well may have won. Right? The nation's divided. We may see a reverse civil war, like I've said in some of my other videos. This is what they wanted. The candidates they chose, that were nominated, were candidates they knew half the people wouldn't like. For whatever reason. Obviously, we'll just go half because the popular vote was actually really, really close. So we're just going to use half and half just for simplicity. Half the people like Trump, half the people like Harris. For simplicity. Now, obviously, Trump got the popular vote and the electoral, unlike in 2016. It's paralleled the 2000 elections. When W. Bush won the electoral, but not the popular vote. And I know a lot of people on the left may say, they didn't want to vote for a woman. Obviously, because Clinton didn't get in, but she got the popular vote. And she conceded. Again, electoral versus popular, that's a whole nother conversation in and of itself. But, this time around, it was Kamala Harris. And, the way that went down, she didn't have much of a chance to really formulate a good campaign. And I will agree with the left on one thing, due to Biden's mental health being in question, he should have stepped down and passed the torch to Harris much sooner. She could have had a much better campaign and maybe gotten more votes. Nothing's ever guaranteed, but And again, I didn't vote for Trump, so I'm making that perfectly clear. I wasn't behind, all of Harris's ideologies, but Trump was definitely a fucking hard no this time around. I was guilty as charged the last few times, but this time around, fuck no. And, this is where we're headed. And this is what they wanted. Because they knew that people on the left, it's like they had a premonition that people on the left were going to have their woke meltdowns and actually disown Trump supporters. And they knew that. They knew what was coming. And that's what they wanted. And that's why we're so divided that we may be past the point of uniting. Even with Trump supporters who had, remorse. And many of them do. And obviously, the extreme leftists, they pretty much like, nope, no dice. You're getting everything you voted for, which, I have a reservation against going that far. That's what it's going to take. The diehard MAGA supporters, you'll never get them to turn around. That could be compared to Mitt Romney's 47% remark. You'll never fucking convince them. They're going to defend Trump's actions no matter what. But the ones that have remorse, because it's affecting them, they may have seen a light, or they may not have. Who knows? But obviously, the only slim chance we have to unite is to look for the ones that have voters' remorse, find out why they voted for Trump. And again, the question can be said that would we have been better off if Harris was in office? I don't have an honest answer to that. I don't think anybody does. And obviously, the leftists, they just want to give things to people. And if we give too much, then it just collapses. It becomes almost like communism. Now, there's certain elements, that work, and I think, and I've said this in other videos, that, should have a quote-unquote socialist aspect. One of them being, higher education up to a point. Whether that point's bachelor's degree or associate degree or trade schools. Because, we don't have enough skilled labor. That should also be included. I mean, the closest thing we have to skilled labor would be, vocational tech schools. And, again, people, look down on those, oh, you're just going to be, a laborer or whatever. And, fun fact, I did see one article where it says, the skilled laborers actually have a higher unemployment rate. But again, that's just one article. But, obviously, I've seen many people who, worked in the trades. There's two channels, both on politically opposite spectrums. Both on the opposite sides of the political spectrum. Tom Powell, he's a leftist. He's worked in skills. He doesn't have a college degree. He's doing pretty well. By making content. He worked in landscaping, and I'm going to take his word for it that they treated their undocumented workers very well. I wasn't there, so I'm just going to take his word for it. And Dapper Dev, that's another one, and I believe he's more. I could be wrong. I believe he leans more towards Republican, conservative. He's also in the trades. He's doing pretty well for himself. Now, I don't believe he's. I still think he works in the trades. He said he was a roofer. So he probably doesn't have as big of a following as Tom Powell does. And but I guess one thing he says he doesn't care what happens to the channel. If it blows up, great. You know what I mean? And and that's the approach I take. I think I lost a subscriber, but whatever. I'm not trying to see if I can become a big time YouTuber. Just to not go to work. And I'm not trying to flee the U.S. just to avoid my debts. The only thing it would take for me to do that would be if shit would have really fucking hit the fan, and you just can't get any opportunities. And again, when you want opportunities, you have to think outside the box. I've been living the nomad life. For the record, I do have a fixed address, but there's nothing stopping me from uprooting and relocating. One, I'm not married, I don't have kids, so. But anyhow, like I said, they wanted us to be divided so they can conquer us, the people. And I don't want to go so far as what Mr. Powell said in his videos, that America is long gone. But we're getting there. If we let this shit continue, we're getting there. And if the Harris supporters can't figure out a way to work with the Trump remorse voters, not the MAGA voters, but the remorse voters, and the people who said, fuck it, I don't like either candidate, and they either wrote their own name in or wrote somebody else or voted third party, then we're fucked as a nation. We're completely fucked. And getting a plane ticket is just the most sensible thing to do. It's not that you'd be running away from your problems. You're running to something. And that's one way you have to look at it. You're running to something. Because there's only so much shit people can take. People only handle so much before they reach their breaking point and decide to say, fuck it, I'm out. Anyhow, that's just my rant. I hope that we the people can actually find common ground somewhere, regardless of who you voted for, and bring our country back. I mean, that's what I'm really hoping for. Anyhow, I got to get ready for a video interview. I'll talk to you.